Welcome to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. And now here's your host, Wade T. Lightheart.
Want awesome health? How about doubling your energy? With our free Awesome Health course, you can get a new video and lesson every single day for 84 straight days. The course covers everything from optimizing your digestion, nutrient intake, correct health issues, including weight, skin, energy, immune system, and so much more. The course could easily be worth $200 or $300 for, and yet it's 100% free when you go to bioptimizer.com. That's bioptimizers.com. Once you're there, just enter your name and email to get the first 3 phases of the Bioptimization report. You'll get the report immediately and begin getting your video lessons each and every day from there on in. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. It's Wade T. Lightheart from Bioptimizers with another edition of the Awesome Health Podcast. And today we are going to talk about a couple important topics, which are, what is the definition of success, and particularly how entrepreneurs might define it. And of course, how sometimes it creates an inability to accomplish it, as well as talking about dysfunction in business and how it boils down to a lack of coordination of action. And today we have a very special guest who knows a lot about elite leadership in stressful situations. Our guest today is Larry Yatch. And he is an elite leadership strategist and the creator of the SEAL Success Programs, a collection of skill-based training workshops and courses that enable high performers to find fulfillment, connect with their teams, and make a sustainable impact in their field. A graduate of the U.S. Naval Academy and former 10-year officer in the Navy SEALs, Larry has spent nearly a decade since his retirement as a trainer and speaker, helping senior executives optimize their personal growth and leadership strategy for superior performance. In addition to numerous military honors, Larry is recognized as the go-to expert in leadership development, team performance, and project management. Larry, welcome to the show.
That was an amazing intro. Loved it.
Thank you so much. I'm excited today because, well, first let's back the truck up. I'm excited for a lot of reasons. Anytime I get to talk to a high performer, it's exciting. And there's been a recent trend kind of globally right now. And what I'm seeing is we have this, increasingly technical capabilities in business today. People are using Zoom and all the different platforms out there, and there's, management systems, and there's KPIs, and there's performance thing, like all these kind of things that happen. And as you go through the different stages of company growth, it creates certain stress points, I think, for individuals and high performers. And I can't think of anything more stressful than, being under fire, getting shot at and stuff, like they're trying to get blown up. Can you explain to us maybe a little bit about your background, how you got into the teams, why did you go into the teams? What was that experience like, and how that translates today in this kind of very technical, mumbo jumbo world that everybody's kind of moving into?
That's a whole lot of things. So I guess I can start from the beginning of how did I become a Navy SEAL? So for me, it all started in 3rd grade when I saw Top Gun. So I went to the movie theater, and by the time I left the movie theater in 3rd grade, I was convinced I was going to be a fighter pilot and fly in the Navy. And I set my sights on going to the Naval Academy, becoming a pilot. And it wasn't until 7th grade that I found out about the SEALs. And this would have been late 80s, early 90s. And at that point in time, there really was very little awareness around the SEALs, right? I even remember going through training in 98. And if I mentioned, people asked, what did I do? I was in the Navy. What do you do? I said a Navy SEAL. I would say it was at least 50-50 if they had any clue what that was. Like most of the time, I'd just say I was part of the Navy band. It was a lot easier. And especially in the late 80s, early 90s, there's no one that knew anything about Navy SEALs. A friend of mine had gotten a sweatshirt for me for my birthday that said Navy SEALs on it, simply because it said Navy and had a cool logo. That was it. And I went to the library and found a book called The Men with Green Faces, which was a Vietnam era SEAL book. And by the end of the book, I was convinced fighter pilots were pansies and I needed to be a Navy SEAL. So that was kind of the start of my journey.
That's great. You know, I think the first time I heard about the SEALs was, I think it was Jesse the Body Ventura.
Yeah.
He was a wrestling guy back in the day. And I was an Arnold Schwarzenegger fan. And of course, when he started in Predator with Arnold Schwarzenegger, then you found out more that wasn't necessarily revealed in his wrestling career. So you decided grade 7 that you wanted to be a Navy SEAL. Okay, then what happened after that? Like, what was the process to get? Because it's really hard to become a SEAL.
Very, very hard. For me, I grew up in Pittsburgh, and I was a late bloomer. So I was a really tiny, skinny kid. And if it had a ball or a team, I was useless at it, which growing up in Pittsburgh in the 80s and 90s, if you weren't good at baseball, football, basketball, you were a nerd to be picked on. And so I definitely had a hard time in middle school, really elementary school, middle school, high school, the whole path. And I would say it was that bullying that really cemented the need for me to be a SEAL. Oddly enough, after kind of years, and this would have been years of deep work after being a SEAL, right, in the path of healing from all the trauma that I experienced, I really realized that I got into the SEALs out of fear, oddly enough, right? Being scared, being picked on and always under attack, or at least that's what it felt like growing up. Being a SEAL was the hardest, toughest men in the world. And their primary mission was to go and hunt down bullies, right? Like to take out the bad people. And I figured if I could do that, then I wouldn't have to be scared, right? I wouldn't have to be worried about the people around me. And so it's an interesting dynamic to go into what is the scariest profession you can do based out of fear, fear of being the starting point of it. It was a very interesting dynamic. And so I didn't tell anyone I wanted to be a SEAL until I was it was my senior year in high school, because everyone would have laughed at me. I got into West Point, which is the military school for the Army, and Annapolis, the military school for the Navy. And I went to a dinner with my dad to discuss which one I was going to go to. And that's the first time I told anyone, was to tell my dad that, I wanted to go to the Naval Academy so I could be a Navy SEAL. And I remember seeing the shock on his face. And, he's always very, very supportive. So he recovered quickly, and he was like, well, that's a great goal, Larry, but, maybe submarines or, something else might be more suited for you. And I think that, if anything, cemented it even more. And so then I went to the academy, which was very, very challenging to get into. And it's a very competitive process while you're at school, as well as to get a chance to become a SEAL. You're competing against the best the country has to offer, and there's very limited spots. So we had to compete, at freshman class, there's probably 200 guys that wanted to be a SEAL. And I got narrowed down to about 55 at our senior year that were qualified. And then we had to compete over a couple months for one of 15 spots. So to go from 12,000 applicants to 1,200 classmates to 250 to 50 to 15 was very, very challenging. And then you show up to SEAL training, which I started in the fall of 1998.
So what is it what is the piece that makes a SEAL, do you think?
So it's one of the things that I say is that SEAL training, which we call BUDS, basic underwater demolition SEAL training. BUDS doesn't make you a SEAL. It just reveals everyone that isn't. Right? You have to show up already a SEAL, and you're just proving the point to everyone. The work has to be put in ahead of time. And the primary determining factor is going to be your ability to self-regulate mentally, physically, and emotionally. It isn't just physical self-regulation, right? People generally think of it as you have to physically self-regulate to be able to do all of the hard physical things. But day one of SEAL training, I would say 95% of the candidates have the physical capabilities to do everything necessary for those 6 months. Yet in my class, 90% didn't make it, right? So only 10% actually made it through training. I would say it's more the mental and emotional self-regulation capabilities that were critical, and that ability to self-regulate is developed over time in two key parts of the brain. And what I found to be a common thread was early childhood trauma. Early childhood trauma created the opportunity for drive to do something significant, but also the trauma would have required significant self-regulation early in life, which set the kid on the path to build the requisite self-regulation necessary when you show up at training. And if you hadn't had that, you could be the most gifted athlete in the world. And every class has the guy that's Olympic, swimmer, or, in my class, a guy was ranked top 10 in the world for Ironman length triathlons. Like, the guy is the best in the world at what would be required to be a SEAL, and he quit in the middle of the 5th week. And it's not just the physical side, it's the mental and emotional. And that guy probably was gifted physically his whole life and never had to experience that early childhood trauma that would require self-regulation. And so if I was to really, in a very deep and a very on a neuroscience level, like, what does it take? It is, I think it stems from trauma originally, which creates the seed of required self-regulation to have the power when necessary in training.
That's really deep. But I know so many people think of kind of like the physicality of it, but really, subjected to possible drowning, suggestible to people taking shots, trauma, being injured in a combat situation. All of these things are way more stressful than just, going out and running, or going out and lifting weights, or going out and, overcoming that. And I think that's what's maybe where your work is kind of translating into the real world. And we'll get to that in a minute. I want to go down there, but it would seem that's what leads to, hey, how do I regulate myself in a stressful situation with a changing dynamics where the plan isn't quite going the way I want? And how do I communicate that within a framework of people in a way that effectively achieves your objectives, which is what business people are trying to do. It's what you're trying to do with your family. It's what you're trying to do in life, but there's a lot of gaps. So what was it like? I mean, I would think it's one of the things I've noticed when I've talked to retired SEALs or high performers in general. Some similar things happen with athletes, in that inside of those kind of contained cultures, these are literally super highly motivated people. What was it like to be working inside essentially the military's most elite group of individuals? They have the resources, the training, the time, like all that. What was that actually like? And how did that influence you both at the time and then afterwards?
Well, I guess the place to start there is to talk about what the environment's actually like. So because I went in as an officer, so I went the officer route first, as opposed to going enlisted and then becoming an officer later, which is a little bit more rare. What's unique about the SEALs is officers and enlisted train side by side through all the training, which is very unique it's one of the only military units that does that. I think that builds a bond and a level of respect for within the enlisted ranks for their officers, knowing that we've gone through everything that they have. But on top of that, the instructors know that as soon as I graduate as an officer, they could work for me, and my choices could determine if they live or die. And so they're going to do their best to make sure that no bad guys get through, because either they or someone they care about, one of their friends, could be subjected to this bad leadership. On top of that, imagine leading in an environment, right? So my core job, my specialty was leadership, right? As an officer, my job was to lead and manage my men. Those men know to the core of their being they're stronger than me. They know to the core of their being they're smarter than me. They know, because the Navy has conditioned them, sometimes to the tune of $1 million+ that if it's humanly possible, they can do it, and they're going to do it better than most people could ever do it. And if I make a bad choice, they die. Like, imagine leading in that environment. There is no room for error. And so I would say that risk, right, that center point of being extremely, there was no room for error. And it wasn't like I got to be a bad leader for a couple of years to learn how to do it well. And they don't develop leadership. It's not like you got a bunch of classes to learn it. You either do it or you're gone, right? It is just an expectation for high performance. And that is a very challenging environment. I mean, it is as challenging as it sounds when I describe it.
Yeah, I did some tactical training recently to kind of learn this, get from some former SEALs that were training me. And one of the guys was telling me a story how one of his people that was under his command had forgot one little thing before Christmas holidays, didn't put away a box, or it was something extremely minor. He had driven down the road 300 miles on his way home for Christmas, and the officer discovers that he forgets this one little box opening. So he calls the guy up on the phone and says, "Hey, you forgot this." The guy goes, "Check." Turns the car around, drives 300 miles back, says, "I'm standing there." Guy goes, "No need to say anything," goes in, closes the lid on, literally like it's a 10-second thing, closes the lid on the box, gets back in the car and goes off. And I was like, most people would absolutely lose their minds, but it's those little tiny errors, I guess, that lead to people dying in those extreme situations. So
yeah, there's a story I tell is just to give an idea, right? So sometimes the way we get to work is a halo jump or a hey-ho jump, where you're jumping out of an airplane at 24,000 feet at night with combat equipment, with 16 to more men into a landing zone that you've never seen in the pitch black, right? That's just how you get to work. Like, that's like showing up and then showing up at the office, and then you got to actually walk to your office, right? Then you get to do your job. So in that particular mission set, or that way of inserting, the hooks on the top of your boots that you use you put the laces on around. Well, those hooks, if you were to either have a malfunction and go through your own risers, they can get caught on there. Or if you were to hit someone else in midair because it's pitch black, you could hook their risers, and then you both fall to your death, right? So you have to put a piece of rigger's tape, we call it rigger's tape or duct tape, on each one of those 4 hooks on each boot. So 8 pieces of tape. Putting tape on a hook on a boot is life and death.
Right.
Like, if I don't do that, I could die, or I could kill someone else, or I could kill both of us. How many of those things do you think exist just to execute jumping out of the plane, landing on the ground, right? There's
an infinite number, almost
200, right?
Yeah.
And any one of those 200 things, if you don't do it, like, I could not tape my boots for 100 jumps, and the 101st jump, you die.
Correct.
So you don't know when the tape is going to be life and death. So you have to put it on every single time. And the other 100 things you have to do. And that's just getting to work, much less the rest. I mean, in a mission, there's 1,000, 2,000 of those things, that every one of those things, if you don't do it, that could be what killed you or killed someone else on that mission. So that level of responsibility is, I think, the primary difference between a SEAL and every other person I've ever dealt with, especially in business. Like when I look at what did I expect in the SEALs that when I got into business, entrepreneurship wasn't there. And every company we work with, this is the fundamental problem. And that is the ability to hold responsibility. That's it. Like when I asked my SEALs to do something, 99.9% of the time they did. And if they didn't, they readily admit they didn't, and then they fix it.
Right.
Right. In the civilian world, if someone does 80% of the standard half the time, they're a high performer.
Right. So that beautifully said. So you go through your military training, right? And I understand that you had an injury and that you had to leave.
Yep.
And so obviously a devastating, life-changing moment.
Very much so.
So essentially what you're saying, if I heard you, there's two traumatic occurrences. There's a traumatic occurrence in childhood that leads you to the potential of becoming a SEAL. And then you decide to leverage that in a positive way. And then you're here in another traumatic situation that takes you out of this super elite environment that I'm sure when you're operating at that level, there's got to be a real coolness to like just everybody's that good.
No, it's normal. That was the bad part.
Right.
Because I went from the Naval Academy, which is the elite of the elite in college, right? And then I go from that to the SEALs. Like I just thought if someone said they were going to do something, they did it all the time. Like I never thought that was an issue. I thought that if I could go to anyone and say, hey, you could do it better this way. And they'd just be like, check, okay, let's do it. Like, okay, yes, I'll do it that way. I thought that everyone just planned every time for everything. Like that's just how that's like, I put it to like holding responsibilities like breathing. Like I didn't think about it. I didn't think that someone wasn't going to do what they said they were going to do. Like what blows my mind is I get into the civilian world. I build my first team and people don't do what they say they're going to do. On top of that, they don't tell me when they don't do it. Like I rarely had a guy ever come to me in the SEALs and be like, hey, I didn't do that, or I couldn't do it. They would figure out how to do it or they'd die trying. And it would be the very last thing. If they couldn't figure it out, they'd come to me and say, hey, I couldn't do what I said I was going to do. Can I get some help? I would have people say they were going to do something easy, like taking out the garbage, and not do it. And not even tell me they didn't do it for some reason. And then they would cry. Like my head blew up the first time that someone in front of me, I was like, hey, you said you're going to do this. You didn't do it. I'm interested to know why you didn't do it. And they cried in front of me. You're making me feel bad because you're making me feel bad that I did something wrong. I'm like, my head blew up. Like I should be crying because you said you were going to do something. You didn't do it. And your feelings are hurt. Like I lost my mind. I couldn't believe it. And then they needed me to tell them they were doing a good job before they were doing a good job. So they might maybe do a good job. Like, I just didn't get it. So it was the worst thing was going from that world where high performance was normal into a world where high performance is the exception.
So what was that adjustment like?
It was miserable, right? It was miserable on a couple levels. One, it was miserable because what I believe the core driver of the experience of success for a human being is tightly coordinated action with another towards a jointly held purpose. Now you add risk into that and the feelings of success go through the roof, right? That to me is how, from what I found, how humans experience success, to be in tightly coordinated action towards a jointly held purpose. And if you add risk on top of it, it adds even more feelings of success through achievement. It doesn't matter what environment you're in. That's what blew me away. I'm in the world's worst environments where people are trying to kill me every day. I don't get to sleep. I don't get to eat. I'm constantly in pain and suffering. Yet I felt unbelievably successful. I start my first company. I'm making tons of money. It's super easy. Like my life is easy. No one's trying to kill me. I have cars and boats and house, and I'm miserable. anyone in the world would look at me as an entrepreneur and say, wow, that guy's successful. They look me as a SEAL and be like, that's impressive, but that's miserable. Yet my feelings of success as a SEAL were through the roof. And my feelings of success in business were miserable based on the coordination of action of the teams. And so that realization that, oh, wow, for a human to feel successful and to produce accomplishments, we have to be in tightly coordinated action. And that's hence our mission as a company, right? Our core mission as a company is to bring those principles of performance and coordination of action to others so they can experience success and produce accomplishments.
So how long did the, shall we say, the recalibration process take for you? And then obviously, you know, in the world of business, you don't have those external pressures of, number one, the filtering process that maybe people get hired under or available is certainly not the same as what the military can use. Second, you know, it's not life and death most often.
Well, see, that's a massive misconception, right? Where someone will say you got high performance out of the SEALs based on the fact that there is risk. And the reason that's a misconception is if you would ask any one of the SEALs, why did you did this, and this that were all hard. Why did you do that? Did you think about the consequence or the risk associated with doing it? They would like, what risk? Mm-hmm. The concept that our lives are at risk couldn't be forefront of your mind, or you would be paralyzed in fear and not unable to perform. So there was no, every time we went into a mission, you didn't think, oh, I have a 50% chance of living on this. It wasn't part of your mindset. That risk to self, that risk to others was never part of our thinking. Therefore, it could never be a driver of performance.
Got it. Right? So that's a really important, that's an important distinction, important. Because what you're talking about is the difference between the commitment to a specific outcome as a positive driver, as opposed to a fear-based model that's driving you to that model. Would that be accurate?
The fear, if my performance as a SEAL was based on my fear of dying, I would be unable to perform my job. And so that's why you take a SEAL, you put them in basket weaving class, they're going to perform the top 2%. Mm-hmm. And it's not because, well, if I don't weave the basket, I'm going to die. It's because precision, ability to take feedback, prior planning, ability to hold their commitments, that drives high performance. That high performance is the same as a basket weaver or as a combat veteran.
So that's a key determining factor. So how does a person today in the world who's, say, running a company or running a business or trying to achieve a certain outcome with a group of people, how do they make that jump into getting their team members to buy in on that level? Like, obviously there's a process.
So the question that I'm hearing you say is, how do you motivate people to want to coordinate action at a high level? That's what I'm hearing you ask. Correct?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. What does that look like?
Yeah. So I would say there's kind of two key principles to think about here. The first key principle is you have to make it apply to them. Like, where we usually go wrong is we're like, for the team, for the purpose, for me, for our clients. That's how we try to drive someone to have ambition to perform at a high level. We as humans are more concerned about ourselves than others, just as a base principle. So making sure that you understand that, or have them understand and buy into the fact that high performance, high coordination of action benefits you, makes your life better, makes your life easier, has you feel more fulfilled. That to me would be the start. the second part of it, and this was when I was dealing with high performers, if I couldn't answer the question why to them very quickly, I lost them. Now for them, most of the SEALs are very selfless, where they aren't concerned with self. They're concerned with mission. They're concerned with team. And so I didn't really have to answer the why for them, like what's in it for me. But they needed to very clearly understand the why for the mission, the why for the team. If they understood that, then now I'm starting to move them into the direction of wanting to coordinate action at a high level. And with an individual in a company, it's no different. I would always start with the understanding that tightly coordinated action is what's going to lead to your success, both in how you experience fulfillment and what you can accomplish. If you're in discord with those around you, you're going to be miserable and you're not going to be able to do very big things. So I would start there. And then from there, factoring in or having them understand the purpose, and the purpose is layered, right? You have their purpose, and I always go from big to little, right? So what's the purpose of the organization? What's the purpose of their team? What's their purpose on the team? And how's their individual purpose linked with their purpose on the team, to link to the purpose of the team, to link to the purpose of the overall organization? It has to be a hierarchy, because if any one of those purposes are undefined or not clear between the team, right? Purpose drives a specific end. It's the rudder. So if your individual purpose is not in alignment with your purpose on the team, you're at odds. You're struggling every day. You're having to use self-regulation to do the right thing. If your purpose on the team is not aligned with the purpose of the team, you're taking actions that don't get us to the commitments of the team. If the purpose of the team is not in alignment with the purpose of the organization, then I'm wasting resources, time, and energy putting effort towards something that's not going to bring the organization to where we need to go. And it isn't just having those aligned, it's having a shared understanding. If my understanding of your individual purpose is different than yours, I can't direct your actions effectively. And so that's the role of a manager. That's the role of a leader within an organization, is to understand those, create shared ones, and make sure they nest.
So I know you have a new book and you do a lot of consulting and sort of, what are some of the things that you see in your work now when you come in and you have an organization, a business? And I know one of the things that comes up oftentimes as people evolve through businesses, what worked for you at $1 million revenue won't work for you at 10 million, won't work for you at 30, won't work for you at 100. So there's these kind of clear demarcation points, whether it's revenue or people, that all of a sudden what you were doing before doesn't necessarily translate into success in the future. And sometimes the people have to change, the roles change, the personnel change. Where do you find your clients are generally, where are they in that mix? There's usually when you bring in consultant, you realize, hey, we've got a challenge we don't know how to fix. Let's see if we can get one of these guys, here that's at a high level of performance to help us solve this problem. What are some of the common elements that you see are showing up for people that's a problem?
Well, what I love is, and it took me about 5 or 6 years to figure this out, but I figured out every business gets stopped at the same revenue plateaus. It doesn't matter what the business is. And that's interesting, right? You take a tech business with 10 people versus say a service-based industry of plumbers with 60 contractors. When you get to a certain revenue plateau, it doesn't matter what you're doing, it's the same revenue plateaus. That was the first insight to me of like, oh, it was $1 million, 3 to 5, 8 to 12, 20 to 30, 50, 150, 250, 500, 1 million, or 1 billion. And so those plateaus were the same no matter what. Within, as you get to the bigger numbers, there's a slightly bigger variance, but at that level, it doesn't matter. And they will bounce off of that plateau repetitively until they fix something, which is when they generally call us. What I've found is the key, what causes that plateau, it's how you manage your people. Like, it is always the same thing. And the way that you manage to those plateaus is the exact thing that stops you from going to the next level.
Yeah.
And each one of those plateaus is a different a requirement to manage people in a different way. And as soon as you fix that, they grow exponentially after, until they hit the next ceiling.
Yeah.
And so that's been my insights. And it is amazing how accurate it is, no matter what the industry, because being a SEAL coming into consulting and leadership development, I've worked in pharmaceuticals, biotech, I've worked in construction, grocery distribution, technology. It doesn't matter, because they're not hiring me for my expertise in supply chain. They're hiring me for my expertise in how do we get people to do what we need them to do so we can make more money and have everyone be more fulfilled and happy. And so I've gotten to see just about every industry, and it doesn't make a difference. And the way you manage your people is a mindset and a paradigm that changes everything when you see it in a different way.
You know, it's like I believe it's probably some law of thermodynamics and biological systems and the capability of communication. So why do single cell organisms develop into multi-cell organisms, and why are they limited by certain sizes? And, you know, there seems to be built-in limits, whether it's biological or even physics or some, you know, extra dimension of understanding that we don't have. Let's talk about, though, the mindset and how to manage people. What are the errors and opportunities at each of these levels that you seem to find?
So there's two sides to it. So on one side of it, if I'm behind the power curve, right? So if I'm managing to the lower plateau or lower level, right? So if I continue to manage my people in the old mindset, I can never break through that revenue barricade. You might go up $1 million and then you're right back down.
Mm-hmm.
The other side of it is, and this is the side that I erred on when I was building my teams, is I knew all these. So I was like, well, I'm going to build my team with a mindset of 30 million when we're 3. So I don't have to get stopped at 8 to 12, right? Like, well, the problem with that is the cost is too great.
Correct.
Right? Because the cost to manage people that way is going to be too great for that small of an organization. So you can't really game the system, right? You can't like fight under your weight, and you can't fight over your weight. Like you have to be right at your weight. When you get there, you have to understand, oh, I'm stuck. Now I need to change that mindset to the next one up. At best, as you're moving fast, you can start preparing for that next level, so you don't get stopped hard. Yeah. Right. So those are the kind of two key principles. What are the lessons that each one? They vary, right? From 1 to 3 to 5 is different than 3 to 5 to 8 to 12, 8 to 12 to 30, 30 to 50. So each one of those plateaus, the mindset that needs to change is going to vary based on that size.
Yeah. Yeah. And is it one of the challenges maybe with ownership, or that they become kind of fixed in how we've done things in the past, or they become fixed with old systems, or they don't want to evolve essentially to it, or they feel an inability? What do you think is the obstacle within the individual?
The like sneaky part of this is,
yes,
just before you get to the roof, you grew really fast.
Yeah.
Right. Because once you make that change, everything comes together. It takes a little bit of time and effort. So it's like a slow start, and then it ramps up super quick. And you're like, we're growing at 100, 150% a year for the last 3 years. And now we're not. Right. Yeah. So it isn't just that they got stuck. It's that it worked really well. Right. Like this thing we learned enabled us to go from 1 million to 5 in like 2 years. And we were stuck at 1 million. It took us forever to get to 1 million. And so not only are they attached to an old thing, they're attached to an old thing that worked really damn well. So I'd say that's the trick. Mm-hmm. And that's why when they usually get to us, they've been bouncing off that ceiling for months or years. Right. And that's when it becomes really easy. Like, well, it's nice because when you know the systems, I can like, is this happening? Is that happening? Is this happening? Is this what it feels like? Is this what your people are saying? And they look at me like I'm a mind reader.
Right.
And they're like, were you sitting in on our leadership meeting last week?
Yeah,
Like,
yeah.
I know, because you're at 8 to 12, or, you were at 8 2 years ago, then you went up to 9. Now you're at 7.5, and you're on your way. You probably end around 8.5 this year. Like, I know where you are based on your revenue, and I can tell you exactly what's happening at your team meetings. I can tell you what's happening and the frustrations that your people have. And so that at that point, changing the behavior and the mindsets is a big lift. But once that lift is done, it becomes very, very quick growth.
So beautifully said. And I think that's so great, having grown through a number of those things with our own company. I can really appreciate that. And I think anyone that's running a business that's growing through any of those levels can appreciate that as well. Do you think that this is kind of a tricky question, but do you think that certain people should say, sort of ring the bell because of other reasons, and other people are saying, hey, I want to go to that next level. Like, I'm gonna do this mission no matter what. I'm gonna go past that. And is there a point? Because that happens both, I think, from an ownership level. It also happens from maybe an individual within your organization. Maybe they say, hey, to kind of go to this next level, I'm not comfortable doing this. Or maybe the company's alignment changes, or they might have some personal issues that could come up. What are those things, and how do you handle changes in personnel or changes in maybe commitment to the next mission?
And now for a Bioptimizers fixed digestion tip: turn cultured foods into superfoods. Raw fermented foods like sauerkraut and low sugar live yogurt can be good for you, but rarely have enough of the right probiotic strains for therapeutic benefit. So here's a way that you can turn them into superfoods. What I do is I get some raw sauerkraut or a healthy yogurt. Ideally, it's grass-fed or coconut-based, and you can empty 3 caps of P3OM into a container and mix it up thoroughly. Leave it at room temperature for a couple of hours before putting it back into the fridge. And what's going to happen is these probiotic levels will be multiplied. In fact, it doubles every 20 minutes. And then what you're going to get is you're going to have a food with strong proteolytic activity. To learn more about P3OM and why its patented strains make it the strongest probiotic available, go to www.bioptimizers.com.
I'm going to answer a slightly different question, and we can get into those. As a leader, or as the head of your organization, as you grow through these barricades, I think it's important to constantly have self-reflection on your personal ambition and the lifestyle that you want, based on the fact that at certain point, like, I had to learn, and this was a difficult lesson, that there's a difference between quitting and not finishing. Like, in my life, anyone that quit was bad. Like, you quit anything, it was bad. I would torture myself in things just because I don't quit. Like, I'd watch every movie to the end. I read every book to the last page. If I opened a catalog, I would look at every page until the last page of the catalog. My first marriage, I should have never gotten married, much less have been in it for 4 years, but I don't quit. And understanding that quitting and not finishing are two different things. Oftentimes it's smart to not finish, right? To choose that there's a different goal or objective or a different way to get there. Whereas quitting is having a perception that I'm insufficient to meet the standard, therefore I have to stop trying, right? Those are two very different things. In my world, they were the same. Right. And as a head of an organization, as that organization grows, at a certain point, I believe that just about anyone can do just about anything they want. I know that's not true, but that's at least my belief system. And same,
the capability is there.
Yes. Could I run a billion-dollar organization? I believe I could. I don't believe I would run it well, and I don't believe I would have the lifestyle that I want. There is someone else that will run a billion-dollar company better than me and have a better life doing it. And so that concept that at a certain point, the organization is going to require skills, time, attention that you may not want to give it. And it's smart to stop, right? Like if you've grown through 2 or 3 of those plateaus, you should start thinking about, do I really want to be the one in charge for the next one? Or should I bring someone else that should do this instead of me? Right? Turning from the CEO into the founder, I think is a glorious thing, right? Understanding that, okay, I've ridden this horse to where I can. Now this stallion needs a better jockey, and I can still be a founder. I can still support it, but I don't need to be the man. Because oftentimes what we'll find is that person is the biggest limitation of the growth of the organization.
Yeah. And I think that's one of the things that, I have friends in the investor world, because there's usually at certain growth stage, it's like, okay, in order to sustain growth and new channels or new development, capital resources needs to come in.
Yep.
And oftentimes the founder or one of the founders, or if there's a group of them or 2 of them or 3 of them or whatever it happens to be, one of those people becomes the limitation within that component. How do you go about managing those conversations with founders or with team members that have maybe topped out on their skill set or willingness to kind of go to the next level within the company? How do you manage those conversations?
And so you mentioned 2 things. I want to add a third. So you said skill set, willingness, right? So let's say skill set and drive or purpose.
Yeah.
The third one I want to put in that we often forget is lifestyle.
Yeah.
Right. So I could have the skill, I could have the drive, but I don't want to live the life that is required at that level. Right. I've had the honor to work with at this point 3 different billionaires. These guys are top of and all 3 or 2 of the 3 created it from scratch, and the third one took it from about 50 million to $1 billion. Right. So ultimately, most of these guys built it on their own. Their lifestyles, so what they had access to was amazing, right? Anything. The lifestyle that required to operate at that level, I'm very clear, it's not for me. Like I will never be a billionaire, and I'm okay with that. Like I don't want that lifestyle. So those are three different things, right? That skill we can increase, that drive we can increase. The lifestyle side of it, we have to be really clear on, because a lot of us end up in bigger organizations than we really want to be in based on the lifestyle side. And to me, the lifestyle side is going to dictate that conversation more than anything else. Being able to help them get really clear on the emotional states that they want to experience on a daily basis, the emotional states they want to avoid on a daily basis. Based on those emotional states, what environments exist around them. When we get really clear on that, we call that a desired end state. When we get clear on that, the decision to be in the role or not is easy, right? They can see that clear as day, because when you know what you want to feel on a daily basis, what you want to experience on a daily basis, and then you look at, well, is this going to help me get there or not? It becomes an easy yes, no. And so that's how we manage those conversations.
That's great. And I think that's an important aspect for people to understand that, when people are working for you or in an organization, there's, obviously they're trading their time for remuneration, and it's hopefully in alignment. What the company's mission is in alignment with their values. That's kind of the ultimate experience inside of a company. You're working for a company that you love what you're doing, and your skill set is exactly what's required in order to hit that objective. And you have that sense of accomplishment, I guess. There's, like you talked about, the emotional
fulfillment is a good word.
Yeah, fulfillment. When people are feeling unfulfilled or they're adapting to new challenges, you talked about self-regulation. What are the key elements that you teach in order to help people self-regulate or ask themselves those reflective questions in those circumstances? Because oftentimes change can be a little stressful. You're learning a new system, you're learning a new communication platform. Maybe you have different people on your team, or you've got new people coming. Like, there's a lot of different stressors that come in. What's the keys on those?
So I heard you say two things, and they're two very different things. Feeling of fulfillment and self-regulation, two very different things, right? So if we're talking about how do we build or leverage self-regulation, we need to understand where self-regulation comes from, how it works, and then we can build it. So when it comes to fulfillment, completely different conversation. When it comes to self-regulation, two primarily, right? I'm going to simplify some relatively complex neuroscience, but basically parts of the brain control all self-regulation: mental, physical, and emotional. Those two parts of the brain are just like every other part of the brain, that you either have built and myelinated clear neural pathways, or you haven't, right? So it works no different than the cerebellum. The cerebellum is hand-eye coordination. That's like the baseball part of the brain. Either I have built neural connections and myelinated and protected them to hit a baseball, or I haven't. If I have, I hit a baseball well. If I haven't, I don't hit a baseball well. When it comes to self-regulation, those two parts of the brain work the same way. Either I have created the neural pathways and protected them to persevere, or to quit. Mm-hmm. Right? It's one or the other. That's why the early childhood trauma requiring self-regulation was the required ingredient for a SEAL, right? That had to start when you were 5, 6, or 7. And then you had to spend a lifetime building those connections, just like a professional baseball player builds the connections to throw a 100-mile-an-hour fastball. When you show up at Buds, you've either built those connections or you haven't. Mm-hmm. You're either a professional at self-regulating or you aren't. Right. And that's what enables you to do it. So knowing that's how we do it, I like to think of it like a piggy bank. So the density of my neural connections and how protected they are was the size of the piggy bank, right? If I have built self-regulation over 30 years, I've got a really big piggy bank, meaning I have the potential for significant self-regulation. The next thing I have to worry about is how much money's in the piggy bank, right? So our brain needs glucose to work. There's limited stores of that in areas of the brain that it has to recover. That's why if I was to throw fastballs or just throw pitches an hour, I'd get better and better and better. After about 3 or 4 hours, I get worse and worse and worse because the brain runs out of energy. My piggy bank's empty. So my job is to not only build the piggy bank by stressing it, right? Anytime I have energy in the brain for self-regulation and I test it, I make the bank bigger. I also have to be careful of my stores. So mental, physical, and emotional self-regulation, all controlled by the same part. If I use up all my self-regulation dollars emotionally, I'm not going to have it when I need it for physical. Say I use it for physical, I'm not going to have it when I need it for mental. Say I use it for mental, I'm not going to have it when I need it for physical. So they took rugby athletes, super hardcore rugby athletes. They put them on a stationary bike, had them pedal as hard as they could to produce as much wattage as possible over 20 minutes. They had a score. They let them rest for 2 weeks, had them come back. They put them through 5 minutes of a mental test. It's called a Stroop test. So there were words of colors like brown in different colored letters. So it would be a brown and green letters. And you had to say what color the letters were. So your brain wants to say brown because you're reading brown, but you need to say green. So all you're doing is testing your ability to regulate mentally. They did that for 15 minutes. They got on the bike and they produced 25% less wattage. Wow. Which doesn't make any sense based on the fact their muscles were capable to produce the same 100%, but because they used their self-regulation dollars up mentally, they couldn't use them for the physical. So I have to be careful on protecting my stores and building my bank. You know, when I teach about self-regulation, that's the fundamental understanding. And understanding that if I stress physically, I'm actually building power that I could use towards mental, or emotional if I have a purpose. Because I'll often find people, like one of my favorite stories, there's an artist I was working with. Guy's a famous artist, amazing artist, obese, horribly overweight. And he was saying, I can't self-regulate around food. I can't exercise. It's not possible. And I asked him, when was the last time you worked really hard on a painting? He's like, 2 weeks ago, I worked on a painting for 19 hours straight. So for 19 hours straight, all he did was paint. That means that he controlled himself both physically and mentally beyond what most people could possibly do. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, you're telling me you can't say no to a donut? It's not true. He has the power. He just doesn't have the purpose. You need both, right? So he built the power of mental self-regulation. Being able to have a strong purpose would allow him to use that power towards physical self-regulation when it comes to eat donuts.
That's a very powerful model of translating maybe that self-regulatory capability in one area and then being able to draw upon that for other areas to kind of go through these challenges. I want to talk about your book. You've got a new book out and it kind of walks people through this. Like, can you tell us about the book, why you wrote it, and why it's such an exciting project? Writing a book is that's a whole trip in itself. So you want to share us why you decided to write a book?
It was one of my clients required me to do it. So yeah, I was the largest self-publishing company in the country. I was coaching their founder and their CEO. And I'd been working with them for a better part of 2 years at this point, and had massive impact. And it was they saw the impact that it had on them and their organization. And they saw how few clients we have, because we're very, very selective on the people we work with, because we do really big things and we do them really well. And they said that that's just not okay with them, that these principles and these abilities to impact people's lives were just so limited. And so they refused to pay me except for in providing the services to write a book. So that was how I got started into the whole book process. And it's been, I'd say, one of the more fulfilling things I've ever done, just based on being able to take these things that we have such big effects in people's lives, but in such a small space on our consulting side, to be able to allow people to have access to that at a low price point. So being able to put really, it's a dense book, right? That I don't, as you can probably imagine from the way I've been talking for the last 45 minutes or so, I'm not real fluffy. I don't use a bunch of stories. It's dense, and we didn't hold anything back. I mean, it's the exact blueprints of how we take organizations and individuals and have them up level significantly in a short amount of time.
Can you give us the name of the book?
How Leadership Actually Works.
Okay. And then what are some of the things that you're laying out for people? Who's that book for? Who are kind of recognizing, hey, this is the book I need to get today?
Yep. So we have leadership in the title because it's commonly understood, but arguably leadership is only one tool in a toolkit you need to produce success in your life. And the core driver of success in anyone's life is their ability to coordinate action with others. So if you look at anyone who has produced amazing success and a good lifestyle, they coordinate action well with a lot of people. Anyone that has been suffering and has very little accomplishments, they're in isolation and usually in discord with those around them. So our primary driver of success as a human, both in how we feel and what we can produce, is dependent on how well we coordinate. So what we built in this book is a framework of how to systematically coordinate action really well in your life. We spend most of the time talking about it from the perspective of business, but I'd say about 2/3 business, 1/3 personal, based on the fact that the fundamental principles are the same. So we often will put examples in from parenting or in a relationship basis, a spousal relationship or a partnership. So it's really for anyone that wants to drive greater feelings of success, right? Feeling better about what they're doing, bigger accomplishments. And it can be pointed at any part of their life, but we wrote it mostly for entrepreneurs and business owners.
I love it. Do you feel that entrepreneurs and business owners in general seem to be more suited for kind of going after those tougher challenges, or the willingness to adapt and grow, than say the general public? Because I mean, that's fundamentally what you're advocating here, is it not?
Oh, it's totally about growth and optimization. And we take the first 2/3 of the book are focused on you as the individual before we even get to your team. One of my favorite things is when I get a client that tells me that their team sucks, right? Everyone sucks. Like, okay, what's the common thread here? It's all the fingers point at you as the nexus of the shitty behavior around you. So until you can perform at a high level, you're going to be very unlikely to be able to lead at a high level. And your ability to perform at a high level determines the teams you get to be on, much less lead. And so there is a big focus on self in this. And I look at business owners, I would say elite medical, generally you're talking surgeons, but anyone that's high up in the medical field, professional athletes and special operators are the same person with different purposes. It's the same makeup. It's just, I put my attention initially to special operations, to warfare, and then to business. There's others that put their attention to business first. And anyone that has produced success, a high level of success in any one of those three domains, ultimately has the same basic makeup. So yes, I would agree with you that to be an entrepreneur and last longer than 2 or 3 years, when you start having been an entrepreneur for 5 years, I would argue you're a special operator, right? You're at the same level as SEALs. I think building a business has been harder than going to war. I would rather go through BUDS again and go to war than to build another company from scratch.
I'm curious, why is that?
In the SEALs, there's always an end of the mission.
Right.
In business, there isn't. There's no end.
There's no end.
None. On top of that, I had support, lots of support. Like I might have had the most dangerous job being on the point of the spear, but without the shaft of the spear, I can't exist. And so in entrepreneurship, everything's on me, right? It's the only support I get is the support I create. And to me, the consequence is the same, right? I still believe that I'm saving lives and if I don't do this, someone's going to die. It's just over a longer period.
Right.
In my life, in my previous life as a SEAL, the consequence to failure was immediate. If I fail as a CEO, I still think that one of my people could die. It's just going to take a longer time.
Brilliant. So what's next for Larry? What's going on in your world?
Yeah, I started a new role. So I've still got our consulting company that I've been running, but I'm starting to work with a private equity firm. So I'm their chief of staff, which I'm responsible for all acquisitions as well as all performance of every one of the companies that are held by the firm. And it was really interesting movement. The conversation we had earlier about, I don't want to be a billionaire and I can only build companies to a certain level. I don't have a desire to do that. Choosing to be the chief of staff of a company is worth quite a lot is a lot different than being the CEO of it. I have no interest in being the CEO of it, but being able to play on that team and have a focus on coordination of action was an interesting choice to be free, as opposed to on my entrepreneurial side of always having to build bigger and bigger and bigger, and understanding that I really don't want to build anything that I am at the top of that's any bigger. So that's been my latest endeavor, which I'm thoroughly enjoying.
Super exciting. Where can people get access to your book, your consulting business? Where do they access all this sort of stuff so people can find you, follow you, and learn more? It's been a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
So there's kind of three areas depending on what you're looking for. So How Leadership Actually Works is the name of the book. This website's the same. HowLeadershipActuallyWorks.com is the book website. From there, you can definitely access anything associated to the book. Our company's name is SEAL Team Leaders. And so there's a website of the same name, SEALTeamLeaders.com, that is the website for our business, our consulting education business. And the last one's kind of interesting. So I love to do things that you could die doing. It's like one of my favorite things. If there's some risk and you could die doing it, like I'm all over it. So my girlfriend created an Instagram page called Larry Does Cool Shit. So this page is I've been very anti-social media just for operational security reasons, but to be able to have in one place all of the cool adventures that I kind of put myself through, that's a really interesting one. Like, for example, I live in Park City, Utah, and this would have been Sunday. I flew my powered paraglider from Park City over 12,000 foot mountain peaks, 60 miles into the Salt Lake City Valley. So I had this, that will be up there as well as all the other things I like to do. So if you want to be entertained with adventures, go to Larry Does Cool Shit on Instagram.
That's intense. I've been to Park City, so I know that area. So running a powered glider in that area is definitely a little.
Yeah. So imagine, you come in Salt Lake and you see that front range. Yeah. I flew over that down that front range into the valley, and then all the way across the valley to that huge copper mine on the other side. So
was there some sketchy moments?
It was. So there was one sketchy moment. I've been planning this out and kind of doing all my tests. I get up and I had forgotten to I had a hood to put on under my helmet, and I forgot to put it on. And it was a relatively nice day. So I was like, I think I can make it, right? But eventually I was at one point over 13,000 feet up, and it was so cold that I was like, I can't take it anymore. So I had to take off my helmet while flying and put my hood on while still flying over what was some of the most desolate high altitude mountains. And at that point, nothing went wrong, but it was just a little sketchy of having to kind of manage all that at the same time. But it was a beautiful flight.
No doubt. Your wife must be a very special woman that she's actually posting you risking your life and doing cool stuff.
Oh yeah. It's to be able to support. That's one of the cool things is that she does love and support my adventuring, because I've just found that that's me. Like, I used to need to escape from the post-traumatic stress through adrenalized stuff, but now it's just, now that healing has occurred, I just feel the most free when I'm out in nature doing something challenging.
Any final messages that you'd like to share with our listeners today?
Yeah, I would say, going back to the core one, I think the one that changed my life the most was understanding that our success in life is dependent on our ability to coordinate action with others. And anywhere that we are experiencing struggle in our life, all we have to do is look at our teams and we can solve it.
Larry, this has been an awesome conversation. I know our listeners are going to absolutely love it. And I'm going to encourage everyone who's listening to this podcast to grab a copy of this book. Coordinating your efforts and your lifestyle with other people is what it is to be a human. And we could all do that a little bit better. Thanks so much for joining us today. I want to thank you, Larry, and I want to thank all our listeners today on the Awesome Health Podcast from Bioptimizers. I'm Wade T. Lightheart. Take care, have fun, and pick up a copy of this book. I think you're going to love it.
The Bioptimizer mission is to help more of the world fix their digestion at a core level. The truth is, your digestion is only as good as your enzyme levels. Imagine trying to build a house with a tree. It's impossible. You need to chop the tree down into small pieces. Similarly, in order for your food to be used by your body, it must be broken down into a bioavailable form. And that's what enzymes do, converting protein into amino acids, fats into specific fatty acids, and carbohydrates into usable energy units. We start out with an abundance of enzymes, and that's why kids can digest just about anything really quickly. The thing is cooking food kills enzymes as they cannot survive at temperatures above 118 degrees. So years of this ends up depleting our bodies and leads to weak digestion. Taking digestive enzymes like masszymes, which has an incredibly high level of protease for digesting protein, as well as other critical enzymes like lipase, amylase, and others is a total game changer. Suddenly you strengthen your digestion, eliminate gas and bloating, boost metabolism, and multiply your energy. Most importantly, you fix your digestion at a core level. To get started with masszymes and to save 10% on your first order, go to masszymes.com. That's MASSZYMES.com and use the code MASS10, MASS10.
Thank you for listening to the Bioptimizers Awesome Health Podcast. You can find more information at bioptimizers.com.